and welcome to Cumulus Technologies SSH Basics for Cloud Security. I'm John Stormer. I'm the Director of Education here at Cumulus Technologies, and I'm really thrilled that you're checking out our class. The reason I built this class was that we had students coming into our basic cloud computing and even our advanced topics courses not quite solid enough on how to use SSH keys. And this is, in my mind, a fundamental sort of skill before you get into dealing with cloud stuff. This is really the way authentication is dealt with in most systems in clouds. We don't really use the password model that we're all familiar with from logging into phones and laptops and accounts online. Even though it's a much more robust and secure model for authentication, it does have limitations, and those limitations can have major impacts if you use these keys incorrectly online. So what I wanted to build was a course that's very practical and hands-on. It's going to give you the basic background that you need to understand just what the heck are these things. I'm not going to dive deep into encryption and tunneling and some of the other topics that I certainly encourage you to go on after taking this course and finding out more about that. But really, this is how do you create a pair of SSH keys for yourself to use? How do you appropriately put the right key into a cloud environment so that you can access it? And then how does that access process work? And if you are motivated and want to try to actually use it, we'll have some exercises at the end where you actually get to log into a remote server using your SSH keys in a public cloud environment. So if this sounds interesting, you're in the right spot. I look forward to seeing you in class. So let's start out looking at sort of the lay of the land in terms of how one uses SSH keys. You will generate a pair of keys on a computer that you have control over, typically your own machine, and you're going to have a public and a private key, and they are referred to in toto as the key pair. Now, you have a bunch of different ways that you can use SSH keys. The one that we're going to target in this class is as a user key. So you will have a private key on your own machine. This should never be shared or exposed to the public in any way, shape, or form. And then you'll have the public key, and this can be placed out in the wild on a cloud server, which is going to help work that authentication process. It's possible to have both a private and public key out in the wild in something like a bastion host, where you first use your user key to get into that bastion host, and then that remote machine is used to access other servers. And then the final typical use of SSH keys is if you're transmitting large amounts of data and wanted to do that in an encrypted and secure fashion, you can generate a key just for that process, and those are referred to as session keys. You will notice that we've got that nice little SSH tunnel. Once you have, in the diagram here, once you have authenticated between an SSH server and your own machine with the public and private key pair, those communications are encrypted and secure. And this is an advantage and an advance above some of the earlier processes like Telnet that used to be used to transfer information across the internet. Now, I think it's also helpful to understand what these things look like. They really are just files, and you can think of them as really, really big passwords in a way, though we'll talk about how they work and are different from a password. Now, this is an example of a public key. You'll see the file name rsa-id.pub. That .pub tells you it's a public key. This is the one that's okay to put out on that public-facing cloud server and onto the SSH server. They typically start with the type of key. In this case, it's an RSA key, so it says ssh.rsa. That set of 4 A's at the beginning is also very typical for a RSA key, and then often you'll have some sort of a key which is more human readable. So in this case, we've made up a user for our Cumulus account, but this could easily be just your email, and you have an ability to configure what that is, and that just lets you know that, oh yes, that is actually my public key, so that you know that you're pasting what you're expecting to paste around somewhere. Then we have a private key, and you'll notice that this is a different sort of format. It very much and clearly says, hey, this is a private key. In this case, you just have RSA-ID. There is no .pub. So lots of little clues there to say this is the private key. And certainly for a user key, you never want to share this with anybody. You don't want to paste it into an email. You don't want to put it on a website, anything like that. You want to keep that secure and away from prying eyes. And if you can take one thing away from this class, other than being able to use SSH keys, it's never share your private key. So once you've generated your private public key pair, and you then have copied a public key over to an SSH server in a public environment where you're expecting to get access to, let's say a VM that you've created, you now are going to be in a position to use that system to get access to that remote server. If you don't have the right private key, you should not be able to get access to it. The way that you will get access to it, though, is that you initially send a request to the server. You have a little SSH command, and we'll obviously get into that in the labs. This will initiate an SSH connection with that remote server. Based on the username, the server is going to send a challenge question back to your computer, and using the SSH private key, your computer will then decrypt the message and send a response back. If that is the correct response, and it will only be the correct response if you have the private key that pairs correctly with that public key, at that point, the SSH server will say you have passed authentication, sends a success message back, and your secure session will commence. And now you can just, once you've authenticated and you've effectively logged in, now you can go and do things on that other machine. You have access to that machine. You can send files back and forth and whatever.